Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is the second meeting of the work group for the NSRP, the Nursing Shortage Reduction Program work. As a reminder, all of you are here because of your knowledge about this subject, and thank you very much for your time today. And we just wanted to remind everyone of what the legislature asked us to do, asked you to do. I am merely the facilitator. I am not a content expert. But what we've been asked to do is study the effectiveness of the current professional nursing shortage reduction program and think about how that is successfully or needs improvement in terms of addressing the shortage of professional nurses in the state. So the ultimate goal is to think about how we as a state are addressing the shortage of professional nurses. The end result will be that we'll come up with a study, we'll write a study and turn that into the legislature, which will include any of our findings as well as recommendations we have to make to improve how we address the shortage in professional nurses in the state. So what we'd like to do to start, we will officially call the meeting to order. And I would like to defer to my colleague, David Young, and ask him to take roll.
Gail Acuna, am I on? Almase?
Present.
Artiga?
Present.
Tracy Cooper? Davis? Marla Urban Roseman?
Present.
Nancy Farrenwald?
Present.
Dan Hooper? Steve Johnson?
Present.
Deborah Jones?
Yeah, this is Jonas.
Linda Lane?
Present.
Pam Lauer? Beth Merwin?
Present.
Jonas New?
Yeah, this is Jonas.
Brenda Nichols?
Present.
Beverly Skloss?
She is ill.
Catherine Tart?
Present.
Poldy Church? Katuya Ume?
Present.
Linda Yoder?
Present.
Sally Williams?
Present.
I'm sorry? Did I hear a
Yeah,
president?
this is Jonas.
Cindy Zoldnerick?
Present.
Eklund?
Present. Present.
And I'm present. I think we've got several Julies today.
Silverman?
Present.
Did I leave off anyone?
This is Poldy Church. I'm joining by phone. I'm sorry, I had a little bit of trouble hearing. I'm not sure if you called me.
I did, but thank you for confirming that.
I'm sorry.
And this is Sally Williams. I'm joining by phone as well.
Thank you.
So as you can see from our roll call, we have quite a few members joining us remotely. We, again, thank you for calling in. We appreciate your time today, as well as those of you who have come in person. Just a point of order, this is being webcast today, so in order for you to be captured for the webcast, not just visually, but your audio, please press your little mic button so that the red light comes on. Those of you who are on the phone, I think we heard most of you just fine, so how you responded to roll call will suffice well for this purpose. So the second thing on our agenda today is to revisit our meeting from last time briefly. Everyone received the minutes from the last meeting. We would like to approve those minutes unless there's any discussion.
And Ginger, I will add, I've been asked to make just a couple of technical edits. We want to make sure we've addressed everyone correctly, and anyone else can feel free if they have anything with spelling and names and all of that. We're happy to fix that.
Were there any
Yes, I just had one comment. In reading the minutes, and they were well done, but it was not clear that most of us were speaking, at least through a number of the speakers were speaking about the over 70 program. It seemed like, not the regular program, and that can kind of get mixed up. And that when I was reading through it, I'm like, no, I don't think that's the case. And it's like, that's for the over 70, but not for the regular program. And so I just wanted to bring that up.
So you'd like for us to clarify in the meeting notes where we're talking about under and over 70? Okay.
Ginger, I
Maybe the
might
speakers
ask.
can say that that's the program they're talking about.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mr. Young did the minutes. Do you think that it would help to have the members maybe indicate? Because I'm not sure. I think you probably would have shown if it was clear from the discussion.
Probably was not.
Yes, some of the comments, it wasn't, they weren't prefaced with whether they were for the over or under 70 program, so it may be helpful. If you would provide that direction to us if we didn't indicate that it was the under or over. So perhaps the best way to do that is if you could email me.
Yes, and in fact, I don't think your microphone is working, so I'll repeat what you just said for those listening online. It wasn't clear necessarily from the recording. I know David listened carefully if some of the comments were about a particular program, the under 70, over 70, or regular. So for those of you who did make comments that were identified in the minutes, if you could just let us know if it was about a particular program and that wasn't represented, and if you could email David Young with that would be very helpful. Or, of course, feel free to catch him after the meeting if it's something you can just quickly provide him that information.
Thank you for that, for identifying that as an issue in the notes. Any other ideas you want to share about the meeting notes? Okay, do we call an official vote to approve the minutes, or how shall we proceed with that? I don't know that we need to follow Robert's rules or not, so.
I would suggest, since we're going to be making those edits, that we wait till the next meeting and we let everyone review those amended minutes, and then we can get an approval if they're.
Okay.
I think that's probably best.
We'll table that until the next meeting, or perhaps on email. We can get an informal
Yes.
approval of it. Okay, great. So meeting minutes deferred. So the next agenda item is to discuss ways to improve our state's efforts to address the nursing shortage. So we really want to make this agenda item about that idea on how to improve. We really want to pick up where we left off in our last discussion. We spent a lot of time talking about the challenges and trying to lay those out in our last meeting. And so this time we want to think about carving that way forward. So last time some of you proposed some questions and asked us to look at the data to figure out where we stand and how to think about new ideas. So we have done that. And I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Julie Eklund, to walk you through some of the data that you asked for.
Thank you. And then I am actually going to hand the mic over to a couple of our participants who also provided data, so that we're all able to together to just have a quick overview of the data that has been shared. But I'm going to begin the process. I'm going to move now just temporarily over to the computer because we did send the materials to you, and we've got them up on the screen for those of you who might not have them. Okay. And just very, very quickly, we just went through the minutes here. Okay, we provided everyone with the timeline. Just want to make sure everyone was aware, though, that was included, and it was one of the requests for information at the last meeting. Mr. Young did a nice job with some data takeaways. So this is some of what we learned from the data that you asked the coordinating board to pull together, sort of looking at the breakout in terms of the awards by the program. So a little over half of the awards have been for the regular program, and 28% for over 70, 18% for under 70. And there is more detail, as I'm sure you're aware, in the information we provided for each institution in terms of what those awards were and under which programs. And then you asked for a little bit of information about expenditures and sort of where the funds were going, and we did provide some detail on that, but this is a brief summary that about 24% were used for faculty retention, 20% for nursing faculty education, and 19% for preceptors. And then we have information about graduates by industry. We thought this was very interesting, and we'll get into some of the detail about this later, but this is a summary. And we actually have Dr. Chelsea Moore, who's with us in the audience today, who ran some of this data. So if you do have some questions about that, she's available to help answer those. Looking at wages for those graduates. And then you also asked us to look at the average age of new nursing students, and we found out that the average age at our public universities is 25 compared to 28 at our community and technical colleges, and that's for our undergraduates. In terms of our graduates, those folks who are pursuing graduate degrees, the average age is 32, and that's at the universities. And there's more detail on that. So just quickly, the first file we shared, this is the breakout in terms of the funding for the various programs, so you can see how it's been allocated and overall. And we actually sorted this by overall funds received by institutions. So this file has been sorted by the right-hand column, but I think it's, you of course, because if you'd like, we're happy to sort it in different ways or provide the Excel spreadsheet to you. So we've got it for the community colleges, for the Lamars, for the independent institutions, and for the public universities, as well as the public health-related institutions. So again, you asked for sort of what does the breakout look like, and so that's provided here. And then this is the expenditure history, which I summarized earlier. One thing that I did think was interesting, and I think probably Mr. Buchanan can clear this up, when we look at the positions and the money going towards that, clearly it's a pretty large percent going to nursing faculty positions. In terms of recruitment and enrollment positions, my understanding here is probably that money was put just partial amounts towards positions, and not, because of how low this is, you're not fully funding recruiters, but you're probably providing some funds to your admissions and recruitment folks for this purpose. Is that correct? So that when we see the number of positions, it's quite high, but the dollar amount is fairly low for these three programs. So I just wanted to confirm that. That was one thing that sort of jumped out at me when I was looking at this. Does that seem accurate? And then we see the funds for, again, folks in financial aid positions. Again, the number of positions is fairly high for the amount. It might be nice to have a little clarity there. And then, of course, the dollars for textbooks, computer-based aids, those types of things. So again, that's for recruitment and retention. And then in terms of innovative methods and sharing between programs, that type of thing, we have curriculum, administration, instructional dollars, facilities dollars, et cetera. So any questions about these data, or is there anything that you think we left out or weren't thinking about? Again, just trying to use the detail that you give us to give you a summary of where the dollars have gone over time. And this is the full history over all of the years of the program.
Just a note for those of you watching online, these data are posted on the meeting website for you, if you're interested in viewing them.
Yes, and we did share it with all of the members, but those of you who are just listening online, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And I think the screens, well, I guess we're not able to show it on the, oh, now it just showed up on the screen, so those should be showing online on the broadcast. Thank you to the folks in the control booth.
Dr. Tart?
So in the meeting, the last meeting, a lot of people talked about using the funds for simulation.
Yes.
So where would it fall in those buckets? Because it's...
That's a very good question. Where would all of you have put simulation? Or I'm going to look to Mr. Buchanan in case he has some detail. Computer-based aids. Okay, so we see 4% for the regular program, 5.4 for over 70, and 4.5 for under 70, for an average of a little under 5% of the dollars. If that's in fact where you're placing it, does that make sense to all of you that you would be placing? those simulation dollars into computer-based aids, or would it be elsewhere?
I don't know. I'm not really using it for that, so I can't answer the question.
Okay. No,
But
for those who are?
It depends on the requirements, I guess, and then where that would fit. So since simulation is so big, and it was talked about so much, I don't know if we would say really simulation is computer-based aids necessarily, because it's a different kind of way to teach. It's
Yeah. Could
not
it be
necessarily
instructional?
computers.
Yeah.
So that's
I was
why
thinking
just
instructional.
asking. So if it's such a big thing, and if we're looking to the future about how it is that we're interested in moving our education forward, it might be nice to really kind of take a deep dive and look at those funds, because we do also have coordinating board funds for simulation as well. And so that's a really important piece, I think, across our educational curricula. So that's all, just a question.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I don't know that we get any more detail. We kind of have to rely on you to tell us what buckets you're placing that in. But are there any other buckets there that institutions might be putting those dollars in that we're missing? The other thing we could always do is do a quick survey of members, just to, those of you, just to get a sense of if we're on the right track for where the dollars are going based on what you provide us. Okay, and so again, that's and any more questions on this or the earlier data about the in terms of the history of the award dollars? Everyone's good. Okay, I think it's pretty straightforward in terms of understanding how it was
Urban
provided.
Reisman, did you have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just had a question about
Sure.
going back to some of the data that was collected, wages
Yes.
of master's and doctoral degree earners. I just wanted to clarify if both of those, it said, like, for instance, the master's degree earners, they earned $85,996 in the hospital versus $58,385 if they were employed by colleges, universities, and professional schools. Are they both based on 9 months or 12 months? Because a lot of universities and colleges base them on 9 months. So I was wondering if that might be the reason that it's so much lower. I mean, I know that you get paid less in a lot of colleges and universities, but I just wanted to make sure we were comparing apples to apples.
These should be done, the methodology should be exactly the same. And again, I'm looking at Dr. Moore, and she's nodding yes. So the methodology was the same for all of this. So the way that the faculty salary data is reported to us, it would be the full year salary is my understanding. Now, if someone was just teaching 2 semesters and not teaching in the summer and that was somehow prorated, I don't know that that would be captured. But it is the way now I'm going to, again, I don't know if, I'm going to ask Dr. Moore to just come up for a moment. When we get wages, we get quarterly wages, and often we will just use 1 quarter, or if we have 3 quarters, we'll expand out to 4. So she'll fill us in on exactly how this was done.
Can everybody hear me? So the wage that is in that summary is actually a proxied annual wage. So it's based on the 4th quarter multiplied by 4.
So that would very much reflect then if someone was teaching, it would, I think, make it comparable for someone who wasn't, to get a sense of those wages. The other thing that we were made aware of, and we, I think, tried to take a quick look at, was the fact that you're going to have people in here who would fall under a couple of different industries. So you would find them with a wage at a higher ed institution, and also find them with a wage at a hospital, because we know we have faculty members who are practicing nurses as well as faculty members. And my understanding was, and I'm going to look at Mr. Young here, is that we did take a little closer look at that to try to get an understanding of what those numbers look like. And I don't think we shared those, but we do have a little bit of information for the number of people we found in both areas. And I'm going to ask, it looks like, yeah, okay. It is something that we looked at, so we will provide that, but I don't think it provided too much more information beyond what's here in terms of these patterns, but we're happy to share that as well. Oh, yes. Dr. Tart.
I have another clarification question. I know on the coordinating board's website in the past, we've been able to find gainful employment data, but the last data that I found is from 2016, 2017. So is this available at the workforce gainful employment area?
We have updated our Texas Cruise, which is the
Yes.
consumer resource information, and I believe that's up to date through 2018. Is that correct?
I just looked last month, so that's why I'm
16,
asking.
17?
Yeah.
Graduates, but we need time to track them. So if it's 16, 17 graduates, we have to move forward to gather their wage from the following year. So the data is actually not as old as it appears to be, because we do need to make sure we have that window to follow them forward. I think, again, Dr. Moore, do you know when that additional data will be available, will be updated for the 17, 18? We probably should have just had you come join us. Thank
Sorry,
you.
I use that data quite a bit.
Yeah, so the gainful employment is no longer being updated as of now. So Texas Cruise is the alternative to that. And we just got in, I think, the second quarter for 2019, so it will be at least another half of a year before we have 2018 graduate data, because it tracks into 2019 wages.
Okay, so in another 6 months or so, we'll have the update for
Where did
Cruise.
this data come from?
So these were a special run for,
I see.
and it's fourth quarter 2018. And that's why we had to proxy by multiplying by 4, because we don't have the full 2019 data.
So these were 2018 graduates, folks who would have graduated by August of 2018, anytime from September 1, 2017 to August 31st, 2018. That's our fiscal year in higher ed. Any of those students who graduated and then were found in the fourth quarter of 2018 in those wages. I think I got that right? Okay. Yes. Now,
Does everyone understand the methodology well? Do you feel comfortable with that? Oh, okay. Because just want to make sure that everyone gets, because there is a data lag, and when the data are available is pretty consistent. So anytime your graduates are finishing, it's going to be another year roughly before we can track everyone in that cohort. So,
thank you.
okay, just want to make sure everyone's comfortable with that.
And I do think some of the patterns that you all thought we might see, you can see here. You raised the issue of what graduates can earn in the private sector versus teaching. Okay. Any other questions about those particular data? And then let's just quickly go, and I'll share what we have with the graduates by industry. And quite frankly, for nursing, this looks different than many other fields. Having looked at this data for a lot of fields, we are not able to know someone's actual occupation from the UI wage data that we receive from the Workforce Commission, which we use to generate this information. But we do get an industry code, and we're able to see the industry that people work in. And nursing graduates, the percentage that we find under a code that you could easily see a connection to using the degree that was earned, it tends to be much higher than for other types of degrees, especially when you look at bachelor's degrees. The more technical a field is, often the more likely we're going to see that, but that's not always the case. We had a good example of systems analysts, where maybe you see about 20% showing up and working in computer sciences, and then you'll see systems analysts who've come from all different other types of fields, to sort of think about the reverse end, or people with English degrees, for example, that you'll see in all different kinds of industries. So for nursing, these numbers tend to be pretty high in terms of the folks we find in an industry where you could probably make a connection. Now, we don't know for sure in terms of what they're doing in that industry. So they may have a nursing degree and be acting as an accountant, but generally we do see a connection. So the first file that we provide is everyone who graduated from a university in the SIP code 5138, which is our registered nursing, nursing administration, nursing research, and clinical nursing. So that groups all the university graduates, the undergrads, the graduate programs together, but then we do break it out for you with the bachelor's degree earners in that SIP, the master's degree earners in that SIP, and the doctoral research scholarship. So that's all provided, and you can see where people are going in terms of industry. Again, these are our FY 2018 grads that we were just looking at their wages for. These are the associate degree earners, so this is the community and technical college data, again, for those who earned the nursing degrees, all provided here. Then we move into, I believe, SIP-wise. So for community and technical, and this is where I want to make sure I've got this right, we've got associate degrees, and then we have just overall in terms of those graduates. And then we move into our health-related institutions. I want to make this clear. The first one for the community colleges are 2 SIPs. We've got 5138 and 5139. So we did include an overall that has the practical nursing, vocational nursing, and nursing assistance, which we're not addressing, but we thought you might be interested. So that's the file with those 2 SIPs. The second file for community colleges, this is page 22. This has the detail about where we're finding folks from the community colleges who have earned the associate degree under SIP 5138, which is the nursing. And then finally, we have the data for the health-related institutions organized like the university. So this is everyone graduating undergraduate and graduate programs. Then we break it out by bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, doctoral degrees, again, from our health-related institutions. And finally, for our independent colleges and universities, we've done the same thing. So this is everyone at all levels in that nursing SIP 5138. And then we provide it for bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and doctoral degrees. So you can get a good sense of how many grads are coming out, where we're, and in terms of where we're finding people. Of course, we have some graduates leaving the state. We have some folks who don't go into the field, but this gives you a sense. And we also, because we have the other industries and not found, you do get a little sense of people who, again, may have left the state, may not be working in the field, or in some industry that we did not include. Any questions about that? I thought this was very valuable data. Yeah.
Hi, on the associate degree one, where you have the 2 SIP codes with the practical nursing.
Yes.
The counts are lower than the one that is just the 5138 for associate degree. Does that make sense?
Well, it doesn't, so we might have missed something, unless there's an explanation. Oh, there is, okay.
So, sorry, I had to kind of guess what was going to be important. So the 5138, that second table, includes all degree levels. So the first one was just associates.
Oh.
Second one was all degree levels. So that's
Okay.
why you see the number difference. But I can easily break that out by degree level as well.
Would that be helpful to have? And when you say by degree level, so it's going to have your, we haven't produced any nursing bachelors yet from our 2-year colleges.
But it includes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Oh, because it's 59, yeah, okay.
Okay, so she said it
5139.
includes certificates, just because she wasn't mic'd at that time, I wanted to say.
okay.
That's what she was clarifying.
Thank you.
Okay. Would you like us, we can provide whatever you'd like if there's a piece that you think would be helpful that we could pull out?
I would say that the LVNs and nursing assistants are not degreed people, so that might.
That's correct, yes.
May be a better, it probably wouldn't be a good idea to combine
So just leave
that.
those off altogether. We did include.
Or you can surely make something about LVNs and something about nurses' aides, but I would not combine them.
But not together.
Yeah, and that's why I think we provided the second file, but we can just, if it's something that's going to be just confusing to people, because we know that's not part of our job is to be discussing that or part of our charge, we can certainly exclude that. But we thought folks might be interested for this meeting.
This is Nancy Farrenwald. I think when we had our last meeting, one of the points of discussion that's in the minutes is there any way to differentiate between the funding that went to the BSN in particular, the funding that went to newly licensed students or pre-licensure graduates versus post-licensure or RN to BSN?
So I will try to tackle that. I'm looking at Mr. Buchanan, who's shaking his head. I know certainly if you look at over 70 and under 70, those programs are focused on new licensure, and we did provide that information. But in terms of the regular program, we don't have the ability to provide that. Is that correct? Okay.
Would that be something you could look at your own campus? I mean, it's not data we have, but would it be data that you have?
Well, the schools would have their
Right.
data.
Right.
On how many RN to BSN program students graduated and how many BSN or ADN graduated.
And we do look at those RPA codes, but we don't get them from everyone because not every institution participates in the program or participates every year. So I think that's part of the challenge as we tried to look at some of those data based on those restricted program admission codes that you provide as part of the program, but it's not complete. But we can go back and sort of find what we did look at and provide what we have, but the understanding would be this is not a full representation of what's happening in the state, or even in terms of the program, because we wouldn't necessarily be able to tease out regular versus the other two programs. We'd just be able to know someone was a grad.
So I think the concern was that, at least from the Tabagni membership, is that the programs they have huge RN to BSN numbers. They are getting a large part of the funds then for those RN to BSN students, and it's not adding to the workforce. They already have a license, and so they're not adding to the workforce in a new role. Whereas like the master's and doctoral students, when they graduate, they're looking at a new role.
Dr.
I have a
Almasi.
question. On page 24, and looking at the second table for master's degree graduates, I see that the code 623110, which is nursing care facilities, is missing. Certainly we have many nurse practitioners being hired. Is it because probably the physician groups hire them? I'm just curious, where is that captured?
If you see it on other files here and it's not captured for the health-related institution master's degree grads, it would be because we didn't have at least 5 folks falling under that category in terms of who we found for the FY18 grads. Correct? Yes. If you don't see it anywhere here, then it could be something that just got left out. But if you see it on any, do you see that on other lists here? Yeah, and then it would be that there would be fewer than 5, maybe none. But we mask anything for to protect identities. Anything under 5, we have masked here. So we've lumped those with all other industries.
Thank you.
And I think, it may behoove us to do just a short half-page primer on the methodology, so everyone is on the same page and understanding how the data is connected.
Sure.
And, for example, why we have industry and not occupation, because those data don't exist in the unemployment insurance data. And then the masking of small numbers for FERPA compliance, less than 5. So we can put a half page together so you understand, so everybody has the same understanding of what the data are representing. Any other questions about the data that Julie has just reviewed?
Oh, and did we get to age? I think, let me make sure we quickly make you aware that we had some more detail on the average age than what we shared and the bullet points for the takeaways. So again, some things weren't surprising. The average age is a little younger at our private universities than our publics, but 24, 25. our community and technical college undergraduates are a little bit older, which didn't surprise us. And then in terms of our graduate nursing, there's actually quite a big difference between the public and private. You've got about 3 years difference there. But overall, our average age of our nursing students is 27. So these are not the graduates. These are just the students who we found enrolled. I believe that's correct. So that would include if you just started or you were just about to finish. So everyone enrolled, this is their average age.
Was anyone surprised by any of the data that Julie's team shared? Well, if there's no other questions on these data, we'd like to ask Pam Lauer to talk about the data she shared. Thank you for sharing the information, because we didn't have it. Again, if these are not posted online yet, we'll try to do that. So if you're watching from home, you can take a look at what's provided. And for the benefit of those watching from home, could you just give a real brief description of what these data are?
Yes, so these are recently released numbers. This first spreadsheet, the 2019 RN enrollment, graduation, and admission spreadsheet, is a listing of all the enrollees and graduates and pre-licensure student numbers that were reported by the programs in Texas during the Nursing Education Program Information Survey, so the NEPIS, which is the survey that's done by the Texas Board of Nursing that we collaborate with on that survey. So the pre-RN licensure student admissions on the very right side of this sheet, that last column that says registered and enrolled is the number that we send to the coordinating board for the nursing shortage reduction program. So those are the new students that enroll each year for the schools. So this is just the 2019 numbers. These are very fresh. I think we just sent this over to the coordinating board on December 19th, and then I shared them with David last week. So these are brand new, and we'll have reports on all our other nursing education data in a few months. So this just has every listing for every program of all the pre-licensure and post-licensure students in Texas. That's really everything on that one. So on this newly enrolled and graduate graph, there's just 2 trend graphs to show. And for what I just handed out, I didn't include the admission enrollment spreadsheet, but I did reformat everything else for printing purposes. So it looks a little bit different than what's on the screen, but it's the same information. These 2 graphs are just trend graphs of the newly enrolled students. So you can see from 2010 to 2019, the nursing programs in Texas increased their newly admitted students by 32% during that period. And then as far as graduates, there was a 41% increase during that same period. You see that the numbers have increased pretty steadily during that time. And if you look back at even before that, it's much greater growth. But you can see from 2016 to 2019, that growth has been really, really steady. So the programs are doing a good job expanding the number of students that they're enrolling. And same thing for the graduates. Any questions? This data also comes from the NEPIS, so it's the same numbers that are in the admissions spreadsheets for every year.
I just want to comment, you can see how important our nursing faculty are. They've done tremendous work. We're very proud of this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if there are no other questions on that one, we can go to the next one.
I would also, just to add on what Catherine said, that the program really has demonstrated effectiveness with this kind of growth. So through everybody's work with the funding.
So this is Julie Eklund for those listening in. I do have one thing I thought was interesting when we look at the pre-RN licensure grad, so which of course is an important focus of the program. And I'm thinking about, I've started working with this data, understanding this data for the last few years, and 2 years ago we were in a position where basically we'd seen a drop or things were flat. So it was the same from 14 to 17. There really isn't any growth, and you can look back to 15 and say we've grown a lot since then, but we kind of had quite a large dip from 14 to 15, and it's taken a while to get back. Could you explain a little bit, because I know those were some of the numbers that folks on the outside looking in were kind of concerned that there seemed to be a stagnation, and now we've seen this jump the last 2 years.
Yeah, so I think what would be most informative and what we probably need to produce and make available is to show the growth by program. If I were to plug in the number of programs for every year, you would see that there's quite a change in the number of programs. So in some years we had several programs that closed, and while there were a lot of schools that either didn't increase their numbers, there weren't very many that decreased their numbers. So it was really, we have more programs this year. Now, the following year, several programs closed, and so that's a big part of it. But yeah, there was a little bit of stagnation, but the last few years have been very, there's been a lot of growth, but there's also been several more programs. So I think for this NEPIS cycle, there were 122 programs included. Even last year, I believe it was only at 119, and so even those few programs make a big difference in the numbers.
I appreciate the fact that you broke out the University of Texas at Austin alternate entry program, because you can see the growth in that program. And we have not been counting those for coordinating board funds. And so my dean has asked that we get permission, because they are pre-licensure enrollees. They have an undergraduate degree in something else when they come to the School of Nursing. They ultimately never get a BSN. They wind up getting an MSN when they graduate, and their license is done after their foundation year. So I would like some clarification whether we can use coordinating board funds in these programs for these pre-licensure students, because that would be very helpful. And as you can see, even without that funding, we've greatly expanded that program on our own.
Linda, what program are you talking about? Because those students would get counted in the regular funding. You're asking about for over 70?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because we've expanded, now we're going into that over 70 number.
Well, I might add that certainly what we're here for is to discuss the programs, the way it's structured, so any suggestions for thinking about structure in a different way, whether they're large or small, should be something that, of course, folks are welcome to put on the table.
We just didn't know whether we could use the funds for that program, because we're the only ones that have had that program.
Well, we can certainly try to provide some clarification on that as well, separate from the
especially
meeting.
if you are addressing the nursing shortage of professional nurses in Texas. That is the point of the program. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that. Yeah. Are there points of these data that you'd like to highlight?
Not on that spreadsheet.
Okay.
Okay, so this third spreadsheet, I think there was a request for looking at demographics and comparing it to national numbers. There are fairly limited sources available to do that. I had identified that the National Council of State Boards of Nursing had done a sample survey of nurses across the U.S. in 2017, and they provided the state-level samples to each state, so that was one source that we had available. These tables include those demographics for about 16 variables, and so in the first column you have the national sample, the percentages for all of those things. The second column is the Texas sample, so we ran the numbers again using that same source. And then the third and fourth columns are where we had similar data. We plugged it in from the Texas Board of Nursing's licensure renewal file, which includes all the nurses in Texas, just so that you can see a comparison. And of course, we included it for 2017, which was the same year as the survey, and then we added the 2019 just for your information. Since we put this together, HRSA released their National Nurse Sample Survey results right before the holiday, so that's not in this table. And that one is for the year 2018, so we'll go back and create a similar table with that so that we can see the comparison and you can get a sense of how these two sources might differ. They did use different methodologies in how they put together their final data because they did some imputation of data and things like that that the National Council didn't do. So I'll just highlight a few things in some of these tables. We won't go over all of them. Of course, this state level file, we have access to it, so anyone that's interested in doing anything with it can just email me and I'd be happy to share it with you. I will mention that the sample that the National Council received was a little bit older and wider than the population of nurses and of the US, I guess. But anyway, so the numbers are a little bit skewed, and you will see that difference in some of these when you compare it to what we have from the Board of Nursing's licensure file. So the first thing I want to point out is on table 1, which is sex, Texas has a higher proportion of males than the US, and that's true in both the sample and through the Board of Nursing's licensure file. Just a few percentage points higher, but it is a notable difference. Then when we go down to table 3, as you would expect, the proportion of nurses who are Hispanic or Latino is much higher than the US, more than doubled, and that's consistent between the sample and the Board of Nursing's licensure renewal file. If you go to the next page, we're looking at age distribution. Go back up a little bit. Okay, there you go, thanks. The samples are similar between the Texas and US, but when we look at the Board of Nursing's data, the Texas data shows that our population is a little bit younger than nationally. And I will say that in general, the Board of Nursing's data is much more reliable because it, is based on all the nurses in Texas. So we don't have to rely on the sample. So I will always mention that when we're comparing sources, that what we get from licensure renewal is a much stronger source for us. And then you can see the median age also shows that nurses in Texas are just a little bit younger than nationally. Okay, I'm gonna skip the entry-level nursing education and we can go to the highest level of nursing education. And there I just wanted to point out the proportion of those nurses who report their highest level of nursing education as being a baccalaureate degree or higher. Between the Texas sample and the national sample, the proportions are similar at 69.4% nationally and then 68% in the Texas sample. The Board of Nursing's licensure data shows 58.3% for 2017. And again, I would just point back to the fact that the nurses in our licensure file are younger, so they're still working on those degrees. Okay, we can skip 7 and 8 and go to, what page am I on? 8. Okay, we can go to number, let's see, credentialed to practice as an APRN. The Texas sample in the US, the national one, they're comparable from that survey, but based on what we know from licensure renewal in Texas, slightly fewer are credentialed as APRNs in Texas. So there's about a 3 percentage point difference there, almost 4. And then when we look at employment status, higher proportions of nurses are working in nursing full-time in Texas than nationally, and that's both true from the sample and from our licensure data. Okay. If we go down to primary nursing practice position, I'm gonna kind of skip the other tables because we don't have comparable data there. But if we go down to primary nursing practice position, again, I'll just point out that the Texas sample is fairly consistent with the national sample here, and our Board of Nursing data shows that a slightly higher proportion of nurses in Texas report working in hospital as opposed to other settings. And again, one of the explanations might be that the sample that the National Council obtained did include a higher proportion of older nurses, so we see fewer of them working in hospitals compared to younger nurses. Okay, next one. Okay, the one about nursing position, it's fairly consistent. A very large proportion of nurses work as staff nurses, so everything else was fairly consistent there as well. So we can go down to primary nursing position specialty, and there are only a few here that I want to point out. In Texas, we see a considerably smaller proportion of nurses who reported working in geriatric or gerontology specialties compared to the national sample. And it was both consistent between the Board of Nursing's licensure data and the Texas sample of the National Council survey. And then if you go down to Med-Surg, you'll see again that based on our licensure data from the Board of Nursing, a higher proportion report working in those sort of specialties than what we saw from the sample survey. Similarly with oncology, excuse me, in Texas, we have a higher percentage of nurses reporting working in that specialty than nationally. And then if we go down to psychiatric and mental health, we have a smaller proportion of nurses that report working in those specialties. So those are just a few areas that I thought were interesting when we kind of see the way that our nursing workforce is kind of changing, and that in some places we're doing better than nationally, in other places we're a little bit behind. Okay, so I will say this survey does include some other questions that I didn't include in here related to like whether nurses are providing telehealth and things like that. So really, if there's any interest in the data, please just contact me and I'm happy to provide it. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, thank you very much. Definitely, if you have questions for Pam, go ahead. Sure.
While we still have a room for improvement, it is just that I'm so thrilled to see that we produce more diverse nursing workforce, and I'm just happy to see that data. Yes, thank you for all you have done to increase that diversity.
Were there any surprise? Oh, yes, go ahead, Dr. Huber.
Pam, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts of whether the data you just told us about are reflective of the lack of certain health care in our state, or that there are empty positions?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. So a good example, I think, is when we look at the nurses who reported working in an oncology specialty. So nationally, of course, there are a lot of cancer research centers and hospitals that do that, but in a lot of states that's lacking, right? And in Texas, we're very fortunate that we have our large medical centers and there are a lot of jobs in that sector for nurses. Then when we look back at like psychiatric mental health, I think we're all aware of the issues in our state and really nationally that we face in providing services of those sorts. And so in some states, they might just be doing a little bit better. So I think it's both. I think it's based on the services that we have, but also the areas that we anecdotally and both in some of our surveys here that facilities are having issues recruiting nurses to.
So I can comment briefly on your mentioning of the comparison of Texas to the United States in terms of nurses in geriatric medicine. As a state, we are younger than compared to the country at large, but we're not so much younger that it explains that difference, because that is a big difference, which is it's very interesting. Were there any surprises for you as you looked through the data? Because you've had more time to live with these than the rest of us.
I mean, I don't really feel like I was surprised by a whole lot of it. I did find it interesting that we had a higher proportion of males in nursing in Texas than nationally, because I feel like in other states we hear, at least through some of the workforce centers that we collaborate with, that there are a lot of initiatives out there for males in nursing. And I don't necessarily see that as much here, but that is an area that we've considered looking into more just because it's kind of interesting. And I think if we were to look at this same data with LVNs, there might be some areas where it is a little bit more surprising and we do see larger differences. So stay tuned for that when we put those tables together.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Yoder.
Pam, there are a lot of military nurses that are actually licensed in Texas. And as you probably know, the Army Nurse Corps is 34% male. So the military nurses, the fact that they're about a third male may actually skew some of those numbers a little bit for Texas because of the amount of military nurses that are actually working and being licensed in Texas.
That's actually a very good point that I hadn't considered. And because this data is available for every state, it would be probably a nice little poster project for someone who's interested to put together maybe some of those other states that have training programs for their nurses in the Army and, or in the military. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
A question. If a school wishes to maybe focus on increasing, for example, diversity, recruiting, let's say, more African American male students, would that be something that we can look at the funds to, or do the NSRP funds have to be in a general sense of just increasing enrollment or increasing graduate? Can we have specific kind of, initiatives, use the funds to focus on some of these areas? For example, gerontology, maybe have a program to, offer some courses for nurses who are interested in pre-licensure, want to go to long-term care, for example.
So just from a general policy perspective, what I would say is, to think about the original mission of the NSRP. How would that fit into the original mission? Does the original mission still serve the needs of the state? So if, for example, we are meeting the numbers that are needed, but we're not meeting them in a way that's where nurses are diverse, are we truly serving the state? And could we make the argument that diversity should be a metric as part of this program? So I would think from a policy perspective, we would need to think in a way about serving the needs of the state and what arguments can and can't be made for that. And, we're open to any idea. So, in fact, we're going to break into groups in a few moments. But think of it from a policy perspective and how the funds can be used right now. I can't speak to that specifically, but if we want to make the argument for change, think from that perspective, maybe. Yes.
Some of the innovative grant award funds have been targeted in that manner, like for geriatric preparation of students and that sort of thing. There's been more opportunity for specific demonstration projects there.
So I'll just add to that. That's a specific program that you can apply for through the Higher Education Coordinating Board. It was a tobacco settlement grant. The tobacco settlement lawsuit funds that money, the proceeds off the remaining fund. But that is something that we are very specific on, and it's competitive. It's a competitive grant program. I would like some clarification because it's my understanding, and this may show my limitations of my understanding about this program, in that this is basically generating a formula allocation for the program. And with regard to your particular nursing program, the way that you want to expend your funds is definitely up to your institution. It's not a prescribed way. So I think any initiative that would recruit more men into nursing is probably justifiable, and certainly we could support that.
Yes.
Tarrant County College has established the Path of Nursing Diversity Success Program and Bilingual Nursing Cohort. Because we noticed that those underrepresented populations struggle more in our nursing program. So our retention rate for those populations are very lower than others. So we established those programs to increase the retention of those populations, and we actually provide additional lectures and additional resources, free textbooks for economically challenged students, and we pay stipend for those faculty who teach additional courses for those populations. So actually TCC has done something like that to increase the retention.
Excellent, thank you for sharing that. So in the interest of time, I would like to ask Dr. Hooper if you would just say a few words about the data that you shared more recently. We don't have time really to dive into every page, I don't think, but if you could give us a brief overview, and then we're going to break out into work groups.
Thank you. When I was reviewing the information that was sent out and looking at enrollments and graduates, of course, I want to look at, well, how many are being licensed, because that is really impacting the workforce. So I went back and pulled up the pass rate for the past year, and I know what the pass rate is for this year, so I'm ahead of you. But it was rewarding to me to look at the numbers of graduates and to see that the numbers of candidates who took the exam, finished the program, and were eligible to take the exam were fairly close together. And even for 2019, the number of candidates who took the RN exam was 12,954, which is very close to the number of graduates from programs, even though we're looking at a different year than probably the programs are looking at when they count their enrollments. So I think that was rewarding. If you look at the sheet, you can see the little calculation with the slash showing the first number is the ones that passed the first time, and the second number is the ones who were candidates for the exam. Now, not to say that many of them don't go on and pass the second time, which is good, that gives them the license, but you get an idea of the growth of programs by looking at those numbers and also at the success of the different programs. I do want to call the attention and support your idea that we do recognize the MSN alternate entry at UT as a separate professional program. They do have a separate NCLEX code, and we look at their pass rate separately, not in connection with the BSN program. If you have any questions about the pass rates, I'll be happy to answer that.
Any immediate questions for Dr. Hooper and the data she shared? Okay. Great, thank you. So as part of our exploration of ideas to address the nursing shortage in the state of Texas, what we'd like to do is ask you to break out into groups and spend about 30 minutes, at least 30 minutes, talking about ideas to address the challenges that were sent in the notes. So if you have the notes with you, or if you have a way to refer to the notes, the challenges that were listed there, and the data that we shared this morning, thinking about that, what are some ideas that you can generate to address the shortage? So I know that there's may be some challenges that didn't get fully articulated in the notes. There may be things you want to add. You may have some questions as well, and all of that is fine and good. But again, these 30 minutes, we'd really like for you to think creatively on how to address the challenges that were identified. We really want to build on the last meeting and try to move forward. So on your name tags, you will see a small number written in the corner. That is your group number. So if you are in group number 1, you'll go to the door in the back of the boardroom here, next to the television on the wall. That is Tejas room. That's where you are going to go if you are in group number 1. If you're in group number 2, there is an open door right here. There's a smaller room with a table and chairs right over here, and that's the door that's open. That's where you will go if you're in group number 2. If you're in group number 3, you'll stay here. So
yes, and for group number 3, those folks who are still on the phone, we'll have fewer people staying in 3, because those people who are on the phone are just going to be able to continue their participation. It will no longer be a full open meeting because we'll be breaking into groups, but those folks who will remain will be staying on the phone and can participate. And I think the public broadcast will come back in half an hour when we finish our breakout group discussions. And also, I do want to add, I think we shared with everyone that there were some options for consideration. I think Dr. Gossman was referring to in the minutes, a lot of challenges were raised, but we also had some options that you all came up with, so we thought we'd put out those few things that had already come out in a little document for you. So everyone should have that, and I put it up on the screen. So might be helpful in your discussions.
It could be a good jumping off point. Yeah. So we will reconvene here at 2:40. So you get 3 minutes. You get a 3-minute break, and then we'll come back here at 2:40. Thank you.
Tell them to have a scribe.
Oh, yes. Also, as you break out into your groups, please identify 2 people or 2 roles. It can be the same person. We need someone who will be a scribe to take notes, and identify someone who will report back on your best ideas when you come back as a group. Thank you.
This is Poldy Church. I'm joining on the phone. And I've just got a question. I'm assuming that those of us on the phone will be part of group 3, right?
So those of you on the phone are assigned to group 3. And you're going to be with me. This is Julie Eklund. So we're all going to be able to stay in the same place here. I think I'm going to give the instructions for the broadcast now. It'll just turn over to a break, as you can see. And we're going to have our discussion just with the folks who were assigned to group 3, with those of you who are online. The other folks are leaving for different rooms, so we shouldn't disturb them with our discussion here. And I think it'll probably be a few minutes as people are taking a quick break. So why doesn't everyone take a 3-minute break, and group 3 will begin our discussion. So leave your phones on. Again, people are moving rooms here and visiting a little bit, but we will quiet the room and have our discussion begin in just 2 minutes.
Thank you.
So if you are in group 3, if you would join us on the dais, that would be terrific. Please come on up. If you are not in group 3 and you are in the boardroom in some other capacity, we would ask that you take your conversation to the hallway. We very much appreciate your having friendly chatter. We don't want to dismiss that, but we do need the room for the meeting. So please go into the hallway to continue your conversations. You're welcome to stay, but if you need to converse, please go to the hall.
Okay. Just realized that. Okay, well, thanks, everyone. In terms of group 3, so it's those of you who are listening in, and I think I got everyone from the roll, and we have Dr. Linda Yoder here, who is from University of Texas at Austin, who's assigned to this group. And I think I have the list of everyone else, but it might be helpful if you do want to add a comment to go ahead and identify yourself first, so we'll have that information. And again, the meeting is no longer being publicly broadcast, but they've set it up so that all of you can participate on the phone call. Dr. Yoder has been kind enough to agree to take notes and report back for us, and I'm going to keep some notes on the whiteboard that we have going here. I know you all can't see that, but just to make sure that we're able to report back on suggestions. So at this point, I will open it up to all of you in terms of your comments and suggestions, thinking about the data that we've talked about and all of the challenges that we discussed in our last meeting. any suggestions for things we should be thinking about in terms of approaches in the future for the program. I will jump in. I know it's harder not having you here. One thing we did discuss as we were preparing for the meeting is we talked about, we could certainly talk about solutions that have to do with how the program is administered. And I know we spent some time talking about that versus solutions in terms of thinking about the overall nursing shortage challenges, and sort of those are the bigger picture approaches and things to think about. Does that make sense to all of you? To maybe we could separate out those two pieces? Or any other suggestions? We could certainly separate out different issues. And yes.
Music on the.
Oh, so you're hearing music?
Because it keeps coming through, it makes it hard to hear you guys.
Okay. Thank you. We understood that you all wouldn't be hearing it, but that it would be there for everyone else. So maybe it hasn't worked as they said it would. I've got someone who's going to check on that.
Okay. I guess this is Brenda Nicholson. I'm from Lamar. If I could start, I think that there are two pieces to go forward with. One is I do believe there is a difference between the people going back for an RN to BSN and the community colleges, et cetera, that are moving towards BSN programs are typically doing those. Many of us have those programs, but perhaps those need to be separate from pre-licensure kinds of programs.
Okay, so you're suggesting a separate conversation, or you're suggesting a completely separate approach in terms of thinking about suggestions for improving the nursing shortage reduction program?
Right, because as somebody else pointed out, although they do improve the total number and the educational level of nurses. So I don't want to discount them, but I do believe that is a different group. And I think we probably need to start thinking about them as a separate kind of group. And then the second piece is I do believe we've talked about nursing units, many of us that are kind of at the max of where we can be cannot be any further or cannot take any more students unless we can do something more creative. The nursing simulations was a good example. Many of us have established simulations with this money, but now we need another innovation, if you will, to try to bump to the next level up.
Thank you. And you mean next level in terms of increasing your initial licensure nurse enrollments and completions? Yeah.
Because we're stopped. We're like many of us. I think somebody pointed out that the increase may be because there's an increased number of programs, not necessarily because some of the programs have increased significantly, right? And we were able to increase because of simulations. But now, and I think somebody mentioned it the last time, nursing units might help us do better, which are kind of not necessarily about increasing the number, but increasing the diversity of clinical placements and those kinds of things. And that's a different kind of area than any of the previous categories.
Thank you. Those are helpful suggestions. One thing that I was thinking about when the data was being shared is that we could go through and take a look at the data in terms of how much of that growth, as we were looking at sort of where we had the drop and it was fairly flat, and then we've seen the real growth. We could go back and look program by program and see where has growth come in the same programs and where has growth come from new programs, because I do think that could help inform these discussions in terms of best ways to think about all of this. And of course, we do have our new ability for community colleges to have bachelor's degree programs. We're seeing more of those springing up. But do you think it would be helpful to suggest to the whole group that we here at the coordinating board do take a closer look at where the growth has been, new programs versus existing?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think you're going to find that over the last few years, many of us have slowed down, or we meet one year but not the next year. And in our target enrollments, people talked about giving money back because they didn't always meet their target. And some of that limitation is tied to both the nursing faculty that we have and the clinical facilities. And many of us are in areas where there's not abundant, and even when there's abundant clinical facilities, when there's a number of programs vying for space, it's not as overabundant as it appears, right? Because you've got 3 or 4 or 5 programs all trying to use space in a maternity ward, in a pediatric ward, in psychiatric units and stuff. So those nursing research units, which could be much more directed, but also have a research piece, a future of the discipline kind of impact, could be helpful. But it's going to take some money to do those.
Okay, thank you. I was thinking about the last part of that. So the piece in terms of the future of the discipline, so that sort of big picture, how do we handle the clinical situation? And in terms of, and what I hear you saying is in terms of the simulation, at least for your institution, and you believe might be true for others, that you've kind of leveraged that as much as possible in terms of the current structure of how your nursing programs work. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So I hear a suggestion for innovative thinking. Is there anyone else then on the line who would like to follow up? Thank you, Brenda, for some very helpful comments. Suggestions from others.
Farrenwald. I'll just tag team with Brenda on that idea. I think the general funding category provides a lot of flexibility for how we utilize the funds. But what it doesn't do is allow us to think big. So we're restricted by the numbers, and I realize there would be an added review burden, but I do think that if we were to look at innovations in clinical hours, for example, that would require a proposal or something that would need to be evaluated for its
So again, thanks everyone for that. And this is a key to the folks in the control booth that they can open up the meeting again, and we will wrap up with some reports back, I believe, from the various groups.
So as everyone is coming back to their seats, thank you for the conversation. It can be hard to have these conversations without lingering on the problems. It can be difficult to move towards solutions. I feel like Group 3 did that, moving towards solutions, and I have all faith that the other groups did that too. But as you come to your seats, be thinking, when we ask the groups to share out, start making notes of any questions you have that we should address in the next meeting. So, because what we're going to do is have a brief share out and then plan for the next meeting. So again, just as you listen to the ideas from your colleagues, make notes of anything you want us to try to address in terms of any questions you have that we can address for the next meeting. So what we will do is have each group select one person to share out your best idea, or what you think has the most potential is what we're going to have, or the idea that you feel most strongly about needs to be shared. However you feel, whatever one idea you're going to share that one idea, and then we'll move to the next group and ask them to share their top idea that is, so long as it's different from the idea that's already been shared, because we want to maximize time by not repeating ideas. So we don't have to start with Group 1. However, it would make sense, I think, to most for Group 1 to start. And since that was my group, I feel comfortable selecting Ms. Cooper to go first. So if you would, please share the top idea.
Our top idea was for the funds to be more evenly distributed, to distribute them by a percentage of growth instead of by the number of graduates.
Okay, great.
So I'll build on that from Group 2. I think, especially in the over 70, if the programs could set their own percentage target of growth. Did I sum that up right? Okay.
All right.
I would say I think the one difference for Group 1 was that was our overarching, but we would actually move all the money into the regular program.
Yes.
And create a formula.
Move all the money to where? The regular program.
And Group 2, what did we think about that one?
Well, didn't we talk about having a rolling average to like a 3 to 5 year average to base your growth upon? Would might be more fair.
We also talked about making sure some was sequestered for pre-licensure students.
We discussed that also. We wanted a separate amount for pre-licensure and that separate for RN to BSN.
If we could just pause and let group number 3 chime in, I think we'll have a great conversation started. So Group 3, if you'd like to build on that. I don't know who was selected from Group 3. Dr. Yoder? Okay, great.
We also agreed with that we wanted to separate out the RN to BSN versus the regular BSN program. There was a lot of discussion in our group about simulation and trying to come up with innovative ways to attract and retain pre-licensure student moving beyond simulation, so coming up with additional innovative ways to deliver information, curriculums regarding what's going on within the nursing curriculum beyond just simulation. So trying to come up with more innovative ways to do that.
So a curriculum approach? Okay. Okay, so those were your top ideas. I'm not going to be super hard on the time, but if you have a second best idea, we can do another round robin and go through, unless you feel like you just want to launch into some discussion now.
We had a couple of other things that we talked about. One was giving a percentage or points for maintaining the quality of the program for programs who have reached capacity and can no longer grow, giving them a percentage, formula percentage to maintain not only the numbers but the quality. So their pass rates and everything had to be there. And then we also talked about giving points for in that growth or in the maintenance, your diversity. So if we would decide on what underrepresented groups would get points, and if you enrolled those groups, then you could get funding for that.
I think another thing that the group 2 talked about was making sure that the funding is going only to support students who are in Texas students, so not the out-of-state students or online students, especially in those RN to BSN programs.
And graduate.
Even if those students end up practicing in Texas?
Even if they're Texans?
Yeah, they have to be Texas residents. We're supporting Texas funding, supporting Texas people.
Okay, I'm just going back to the larger policy where the issue is to address the nursing shortage in the state. So if someone in Oklahoma trained but then practiced in Texas, I mean, I don't know.
Well, right now, if someone is out of state and they are in a program that they have no presence in state, then those nurses would not be counted because those are not reported to us for formula funding, so they wouldn't be included. If you had someone, say, who came from Oklahoma, enrolled on site at a nursing program, say at UT Austin, a face-to-face program, they would be included. But if someone is, say, doing an online program at a Texas institution and they never come to Texas, they would not be included right now in the funding. So certainly we can talk about changes to how that currently works.
But that's what you want, right? For them not to be included?
You want someone, even if they come to Texas for their nursing program, not to be included or counted as part of a reworked program.
Texas funds staying with Texas people, I guess.
Okay.
At the end of the day, helping Texas.
Shortage of nursing in the state.
I think the problem is we have students that go through our program. We're right next to Fort Hood, and they go through our program, and then as soon as they graduate, they go somewhere else. But they're going, we don't have control over where they go when they graduate. So I don't know how you monitor that.
So there was some discussion in our group about tying something to the workforce. And we did talk about it, but it's such a long timeline, and it would take so long that was maybe not reasonable. Yeah.
I think that the intent was more for the regular program with like graduate students.
I'm sorry.
Who, the caller, go ahead. Was someone wanting to speak who's dialing in? Oh, okay, please continue.
For some reason, we
I think
can't hear.
the comment was more intended for like graduate students. So say I live in Wyoming and I'm.
Yes, did you say you want to interrupt? Yeah, I don't. Yeah, we're having technical difficulties hearing you, I suppose. So we'll continue here.
And I'm enrolled in an online program through a state school, a Texas state school, get my degree from a Texas state school, but I live in Wyoming, I plan to practice in Wyoming, et cetera. It was kind of intended to capture that.
I'm sorry, I was wondering how many RN to BSN programs don't have an online presence. As it was stated.
You are breaking up. We're happy to answer your question, but we may do that post-meeting on email, just because we're not able to hear your full question.
Yes, and I did hear the partial question about RN to BSN. We know a lot of programs have an online component. In terms of the funding, it's those programs that don't have any Texas presence at all, where it's students who are never coming to who are not coming to Texas as part of the program. It's a fully online program. Those are the programs that aren't included for funding, if that was the question. We know there's hybrid programs, there's a mix in terms of the Texas programs, and those would be included. It's the fully online when it's students who are out of state that aren't included now.
Thank you, Dr. Eklund. So, Stacy?
So one last item that I think might be really helpful for all programs, especially those brand new, new program directors or new deans that are coming into Texas, is to have, for whatever program we have, a timeline that shows how you participate in the program. Because of its complexity, maybe new program directors or new deans are kind of unsure about how to go about stepping into playing into the program, and a timeline so that they could know, here's when I apply, here's what the counts are based on, and here's when I can spend the money. So I know we had one example of a new person who said, I didn't even know what this was, and I was told, just leave this alone.
So professional development for new administrators.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
I think that'd be good.
Yeah. So we have 8 minutes left. What we'd like to do is collect the notes from your note taker from your group so that we can integrate that into the minutes. If you would turn those notes over to, or email them to David Young, that would be great. Thank you. We need to talk about planning for our next meeting, which we would like to have in February. So 2 things. One, any questions or issues you want us to try to address in that meeting, please share now. And then the second piece would be for us to try to select a time frame for that. So David, do you have thoughts on when in February would be good for the group to reconvene? Or Julie?
Well, as we've thought about laying out how many meetings and what we've shared, we're thinking like a 6-week increments at this point. We know we went longer because of the holidays, so I think maybe looking at the last 2 weeks of February, if that sounds reasonable to everyone. I know we had a couple of data requests come out of the full group meeting, and we had a couple actually come out of our breakout group meeting, so that'll give us some time to pull the data together, to pull the notes together from all of the discussions that happened today, to start being able to think about some of these solution pieces. So does that work for folks to maybe send out a doodle poll or something for the last 2 weeks in February? Are there any association meetings or things that are going to be happening then that we need to avoid for time?
The 26th is our TA.
Okay, so we'll avoid that, yeah. And that's at the end of the week, yeah.
February 24th and 25th, the BON and TONE are having a joint summit.
Okay.
So that might affect a few people like Cindy.
I'm thinking the 3rd week maybe of February, then the 4th week sounds like it's not going to work. So maybe we'll look at that, or the end of the 2nd week.
Does that also, would the 3rd week work for you?
All right, let me get my calendar up.
And I'm going to be out of town that 3rd week. The end of the 2nd week would be good.
Okay, I'm going to open my calendar here. And we understand we're not necessarily going to get everyone, and we won't schedule it on Valentine's Day, but we can think about, we've got the 12th and 13th, possibly, and then I'm looking at, maybe 18th, 19th, 20th. Are those days that we could possibly send? I'm seeing some nods and not hearing any, and of course, folks would be welcome to call in again, so if you are off at something else and could call in. Is that sounding okay?
18th, 19th looks like good.
Okay.
Looks good for everyone.
So
18th? Okay.
17th for people too. That gives us another day to look at maybe. I mean, sometimes Mondays are, oh, President's Day,
Oh,
thank you.
President's Day,
Yes, so
yeah.
we won't do it on the holiday.
Okay, so 18th
Great,
and
that's
19th?
That's helpful, and,
Yes.
the week before, the 13th,
Yeah.
the 12th and 13th, the week before. Nope, that gives us enough to start with, and we'll share all of that.
Are there any burning questions that you can articulate now that you want us to think about for the next meeting? You can always send them afterwards in email, that's fine. Just wondering if there are any top-of-mind questions.
I
Yes.
have a comment. I was talking in our small group. I think one of the questions that came up that we can easily solve is there's a lot of discussion about how to spend the money and having ideas. And deans and directors could address that. You know, we could easily get that information from people about how they spend the money. As I said, I think from our last discussion, that was always a question. How do you spend, can I spend it on this? Can I spend it on that?
And I think we've talked about a few other things where we thought it might be useful to survey institutions and ask a question. So we may just start a library of things where, as part of this study, we ask them all at the same time.
And that was one of the things that Group 3 mentioned was, we had mentioned at the previous meeting that people needed at least a beginning list of how can you spend the money, what is allowable. And then the other thing we brought up was, it was in the packet of information that you sent, was the notion of increasing the faculty loan repayment amount. And the other thing that we came up with was, you have to work as full-time faculty in order to participate in that program. But there's a lot of nurses that don't want to give up their hospital job, which pays more and has better health benefits for the most part. And so they work part-time as faculty. I have former students that are working part-time at ACC, for example, but that doesn't count toward their faculty loan repayment, but they're not yet willing to give up their other job, which has better pay and benefits. So the issue is there a way to look at that program to where people can use semesters of teaching and carve together repayment so that it's not like you have to work full-time, but even if you're working as faculty and really contributing part-time, can you carve that together toward your faculty loan repayment? So is there, looking at innovative ways to do things like that?
We did talk about that too. We did have a bill last session that would have expanded the money for the faculty loan repayment program, would have made it available to part-time faculty, and would have increased the amount that faculty could get in loan repayment. However, it didn't progress through the session, and TNA does plan to work on promoting that bill next session as well.
Okay. And certainly no reason, suggestions couldn't come from this group tied to the nursing shortage reduction program. One thing I was going to say is we're happy to go back to the folks who raised this idea and look at some of our other repayment programs, focus in other areas, and maybe bring some of those ideas forward just for all of you, sort of this is how some of these different programs work. So, maybe there are some potential ways to tie that in because of the faculty challenges.
Okay, we thank you, Julie. We are officially out of time. Unless there are any burning closing comments, I propose we adjourn until our next meeting, and we are always available by email if you need to follow up with questions or requests for information for the next meeting, and we will send out the doodle poll to get the best time for that February 18-19 window for when everyone seems to be available.
May I? Yes. Just quickly, a show of hands, two quick things. Did people appreciate the breakouts? Was that a helpful way for more people to have a voice? I'm seeing yes. Then should we extend the length of the next meeting maybe to 2.5 to 3 hours so we can really have time for a breakout and develop some of these ideas and bring it back? I know it's a pretty large group to hear all the voices, so that's helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Safe travels, everyone. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.